Hello and a very warm welcome. My name's David Roth from WPP, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to Follow the Sun, 24 hours of broadcasting right across the world to celebrate the launch of the WPP BAV Best Country Study for 2021, done in conjunction with US News and the Wharton Business School. It's a pleasure to have you join us for this section. Of course, this broadcast is going to be right across the world. We're starting in Australia and New Zealand, and we'll be ending at the end of the 24-hour period in the USA. Well, we've got an absolutely packed broadcast today, and I'd like to start off by introducing Mike Sussman from BAV. Mike has been the brainchild behind the Best Country Studies for many years, and there's nobody better to put the Best Country Study into context. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, David. We're really excited about the launch of the 2021 Best Countries study. It's the most comprehensive study of the power of nation brands. We've been doing this for 6 years, covering countries that represent 95% of the global GDP and about 75% of the world's population. So an amazing coverage. This year, we're looking at 78 countries. We spoke to over 17,000 business decision makers, citizens, and elites around the world. And we've ranked countries on a battery of metrics, including 26 key rankings that we'll talk about throughout this report and throughout the app. One thing we've seen over time is the shifting impact of soft power. It's becoming more and more important to driving the power of a country, while hard power, like banks and tanks, as we call it, the more traditional power, is becoming less impactful on the success of a nation. When we think about the power of a nation, we think about 10 key dimensions, and you can look at each of these ranks and how a country does on these things, from entrepreneurship to cultural influence to quality of life. We've introduced 2 new ones that are becoming more and more important today in these changing dynamics of culture. One of those is how purposeful, how socially purposeful is a nation. And the second is how agile is a nation, how responsive it is to things, particularly during a COVID era. And both of those dimensions are extremely important in driving the GDP and the success of a nation. Agile nations are seen as 3 times more likely to be a better job market. They're rated 3.2 times more likely as being economically influential. They are more connected to the rest of the world. So agile nations are doing something to resonate with people globally. Really important to mention, and it's the biggest driver now of GDP. And that's something that the nations need to be more and more of today. So when you think about agility, the top nations around the world this year are USA, number 1 in terms of being an agile country, followed by Australia, and in 3rd place is Canada. We continue to see the rising power of purpose, not just for brands, but also for nations. In fact, purposeful nations are 57% more likely to be considered for tourism, 55% more likely to be considered as a place to do business. So it's important to be seen as a purposeful and socially responsible country. Number 1 on this purposeful dimension is Canada, followed by Denmark, and in 3rd place is New Zealand out of 78. So pretty impressive, pretty strong dimensions, very important. We also see the power and impact of brands that resonate from countries. In fact, 79.5% of citizens say that consumer brands play an important role in defining a country's culture. So there's a strong relationship between the brands and the nation. We also see that 78.6% of citizens say that the country a product is made in impacts their preference for a brand. So you can see that interplay between brand and country and how important it is today. And we started measuring the power of what does it mean to be made in a specific country. What does made in America mean, and made in China? And we can rank the power of these nations in terms of their exports. So, for instance, Germany ranks number 1 in terms of the country you'd want to buy an automobile from. They also dominate on pharmaceuticals and beer. So you can see a little bit of a balanced power of that nation. Italy is number 1 on fashion. So that's the top brand for when you're thinking about buying fashion brands. France owns cosmetics. In terms of the best countries for real estate, Canada ranks number 1, followed by the United States and then France. So overall, again, you can see how the building blocks of a nation affect its overall ranking. And we're excited to share some more details with you. Back to you, David.
Well, now it's time to get an overview of the key insights from the 2021 study on a global perspective. And who better to do that for us than Professor David Ribstein from Wharton University. Professor Ribstein has been our partner in this study since it started, and his unique understanding and unique perspective of countries, of brands, and what's driving GDP growth is unrivaled. So let's hear from David now.
Hello, I'm Dave Reibstein. I'm a marketing professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. I've been involved with the Best Country Study since its inception. This year has been a different year. It's been a transformational year. There's been many things that have affected how we view countries and how we live our particular lives. First and foremost, obviously, we've had to deal with the COVID-19 and the tragic loss of millions of lives all around the world. Accompanying this has been the huge impact on economies of various different countries, leading to an overall global recession. Some countries have handled the pandemic well, such as South Korea and Taiwan and several others, whereas other countries have not handled it nearly as well. Accompanying this pandemic has been the subsequent vaccine distribution. And this has required acquisition of vaccines as well as some form of equitable distribution of those. Perhaps Israel has been the country that has done the best at it. There are others that are catching up, but there are other countries that are still struggling today with trying to manage the vaccine distribution. A third major thing that's been happening this year has been the Black Lives movement that originated in the United States and has found it in various other countries all around the world. Climate impact has been a major event that's happened in various different countries. Perhaps the most notable are the brush fires that happened in Australia. We've seen other events, such as the explosions that happened in the Beirut port, killing millions of lives. And of course, we could not ignore Brexit and the impact that's had on the British economy, as well as the economies of Europe. Many, many events have made this year an exceptional year. And it's part of what it is that we've all had to adjust to. Perhaps the greatest impact, of course, has been the pandemic. And what we have witnessed as individuals is we see that how we buy and where we shop, that's changed. How we work, many of us working from home, some of us not having jobs. So there's been a dramatic impact for individuals, where we eat and how we interact with family and friends, dramatically affected, and we've had to adapt. Businesses have had to adapt as well. And what they have had to do is how they connect with their customers has changed. Meetings have changed. The ability to have trade shows dramatically affected. The whole supply chain has been disrupted. And certain industries, such as the hospitality industries or the airline industry, have been dramatically affected, with sporting events being canceled throughout the world. So many, many industries have suffered as a result. And when I've talked to business leaders, almost inevitably, what it is that they tell me is they've needed to be agile. And it sort of is the buzzword that I hear from companies. But that's not restricted to just individuals and companies. Countries have had to adapt as well. And what it is that we have seen is we see, obviously, trying to get the healthcare systems up to speed and handling with this medical crisis that we've got. And getting medical supplies to the hospitals and to individuals has also been an issue. But trying to cope with the unemployment levels and trying to deal with that and supporting the local governments has been a major issue for countries all around the world. And what countries have had to do they've had to adapt as well. Well, we too at the Best Country Study have had to go through our own adaptations. We've added 13 new attributes that we use for evaluating countries, and we have taken one of the previous dimensions, that of citizenship, and we have morphed it into a dimension that we call social purpose. And what is social purpose? It has many of the dimensions that we had in citizenship, but it also includes dimensions such as human rights and racial equality and social justice and climate concern, that have all been attributes that now feed into the social purpose dimension. And we've added a new dimension. And this new dimension, this new overall factor is one of course, agility. And what is it that we have feeding into agility? Our perceptions of countries in terms of their adaptability and in terms of responsiveness and how progressive they are and how modern they happen to be and how dynamic they are, all feed into this agility dimension. So with that said, let's take a look at the latest rankings that we have.
Thank you. It's a brilliant sunny day in the 11th of May. We're here as part of the Best Countries 2021 launch of the report. And this is Follow the Sun, as we're following the sun, and it's 11 a.m. here in Singapore. I have with me a guest, Don Lim from the Economic Development Board of Singapore, a body that's entrusted with bringing economic development to Singapore in the form of investments and people, talent, as well as resources. And she heads the vertical for commercial and professional services. Don, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Harry. It's good to be here. It is a bright sunny day.
It is. And let me kick it off with probably a question that is much more prescient in the sense that Singapore has obviously unsurprisingly done very well on the rankings. We're number 14 out of a list of over 80 countries. And we have moved up from 16 over the last 2 years. And of course, in addition to the best countries, everybody is well aware that in Bloomberg, we were declared the most resilient country, and the pandemic being top of mind for everyone. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about Singapore's approach to it and how we seem to have sort of come out on top of that.
Thanks, Harry. And indeed, the COVID situation has really challenged all countries globally, Singapore notwithstanding. And us being a global business hub and being so open to business travel, to leisure travel, being an interchange, a transit stop for travelers globally, for goods globally, COVID has really hit us quite in a very major way, right, in the past year. And I think if you can see all the different measures that we've taken domestically to try and mitigate that impact on our workers, on our businesses, and on anybody who's chosen Singapore as their base. I know, and notwithstanding sort of the initial few days where very little information was available and everyone was just making the best decisions we could, given the very little information that there was. I think what COVID has enabled Singapore to do is to really build that trust. That reputation for trust. And it's trust on multiple levels, I would say. There's trust between the citizens and the government. And I think a lot of that has taken a bit of time to show up, but you can see in the way that we've been able to roll out the vaccines in an orderly manner, right? And we've guaranteed vaccines for every resident who's in Singapore, right? And we've been able to more or less bring the situation under control because of the tracing capacity that we've built within the government to try and make sure we are able to access the information to clamp down on any clusters that emerge, right? Now that we understand more how the virus works, right? So that's, in a way, given us some level of trust between the citizens and government, but it is an ongoing journey that we need to continue to earn and to maintain that trust with the citizens. Then the other level of trust is actually between governments, right? So between Singapore and other governments, right? And I think in this case, the whole vaccine diplomacy is a new playing field, right? For nations and for nation states between governments and other governments, right? And one of the things that, as a small nation state, right, Singapore has had the ability to play a significant role is in COVAX. So together with Switzerland, we are the co-chairs for the COVAX facility, which provides a collective procurement of vaccines on behalf of about 100 nations. And this actually enables us to help lower income economies to access vaccines in a more efficient and effective way than the market forces would have allowed for it otherwise, right? And again, this helps us build trust. It helps other governments build trust with each other, right, in a time of shortage of resources, right? And I think our agility in dealing with the situation, and I think in your report for this year, I think Singapore shows up quite well in the area of agility, right? Yeah, and I think our agility in dealing with the situation, which is also enabled by the fact that we are a small island state. So that in itself also lends itself some advantages for handling the situation. But all of this has given us a new level of trust and reputation in the global system, and you can see that some of that showing up with the announcements of the World Economic Forum moving Davos, the annual Davos meeting, out of Switzerland into Singapore for this year, right? You can see also the recent announcement by Bloomberg to hold a new economy forum in Singapore in November. So I think all of these decisions by multilateral international institutions, right, actually reflect that level of trust that Singapore has gained in the international system, and something that I think we hope to continue to be able to grow.
Wonderful, thank you. And it is. I mean, I've like millions of others who are living in Singapore, been privileged to experience the efficiency at work, and I also see the compassion. I think over the last few days we've seen some reaction to what's happening in Tan Tock Seng Hospital and the staff and the Prime Minister responding. So it's been a time where I would say famously the stiffness of Singapore, or perceived stiffness of Singapore, has also been overcome. We've shown ourselves to be a very compassionate government, as well as a very compassionate society, where everybody's looked after each other, particularly the healthcare workers, etc. So it's been a phenomenal response, and I think the use of technology, where again we score very highly in the study, is really helpful. I don't think any other country on the planet has the level of tracing that we have and the technologies that are empowering it, while respecting privacy concerns and so on. I guess it's fantastic. Which brings me to a topic where Singapore's traditionally lagged a bit, but this year is doing a little bit better, which is the notion of Singapore's soft power. Of course, we don't have a movie industry or a music industry the way that many of the countries like, say, Japan or Hong Kong or China or India have, which enables them to project that soft power. What are the tools that Singapore has, and how do you see that part of the equation evolving?
Yeah. Thanks, Harry. You're right, and I wanted to underscore, from your first question leading into this one, that the premise of trust, I think, is something we need to continue to build on, both in the current COVID situation as well as when we talk about long-term soft power, right? But let me just come to this concept of the soft power. I think as a small island, city, nation, state, all rolled into one, right? Soft power is incredibly important to us. And our Singapore branding tagline is actually passion made possible, right? And we celebrate, it's really about celebrating the fact that we are small, but in spite of being small, the spirit and the passions of people who choose to be in Singapore, they are able to make their passions alive, come to life, make impossible possible, right? And being able to harness infinite resources around the world to make that magic happen. And I think, if I break down into what does it really mean, for us as a small island, it's really about finding the sweet spot to be relevant, right? So that we continue to have license to play, we continue to have a seat at the table. It's really about being relevant to the other countries around us, to the other big players in the global system, right? And that relevance really is key. Now, there are a couple of ways that a small country like ours can find relevance. But I think the very first one for us is really economic prowess, right? Economic prowess and economic heft gives countries a seat at the table, at the very least, right? Now, with a domestic population of 5.5, pushing maybe 5.86 million in the next couple of years, right? We really can't beat the big markets in terms of size, right? So we really have to find what that sweet spot of relevance is. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, we showed up well on the attributes of innovation, on technology, even entrepreneurship. I think we showed up quite well. And that's really where we find that we have that relevance to play globally, and that we can bring value to other businesses, to other governments, to other countries, right? The most interesting one for me is recently we have emerged as the global food tech hub, because with all the publicity around, I think it was Eat Just, right? And the lab-grown chicken, and that being awarded regulatory approval to be served in the restaurants here. I think that really put us on the map in terms of innovation, right? In a time where there's so much innovation around food, around agri-technology, right? And for a nation state that has no farming and no agriculture, for us to be able to put ourselves on the map, I think really goes to show that we're trying to find where that relevance is in a way that we can play well, right? So all of this actually really reinforces Singapore in a soft power manner as a brand, as a force that you should take seriously, right? The second one I would just mention very briefly, I think, is our neutrality, right? And I think this is something that we've been known for a long time. But again, our relevance is precisely in the fact that we are neutral, right? In a region, if you look at Asia Pacific, right, where religious politics or race politics tend to dominate quite a bit because of the history invariably of different countries, right? Singapore actually comes out very well as a neutral place where different groups and communities can coexist peacefully, right? And we do what we can to uphold that neutrality very strongly. And I would say if you looked at the 2018 Trump-Kim summit, right, I think that was again a good reflection of that neutrality, of that soft power that we were able to demonstrate over time, right? And that Trump-Kim summit really helped to put Singapore on the map. Actually, before that, I think very few people really knew where Singapore. I used to get questions of, "Oh, Singapore, where is that? Is it somewhere in China?" So we used to get that, despite 50 over years of independence. So things like that help to put us on the map, help people to understand and recognize who we are. That said, there are some areas of our soft power that we can still improve. And I think the cultural part is probably one area that the world still has a lot to see and a lot for us to show, right? So I know we talked about, you mentioned Singapore doesn't have our own movie industry or, our music industry. We have very good artists, but as you know, our domestic market isn't that big, right? Compared to the Bollywood industry or the Hollywood industry, for that matter, right? So that's Crazy Rich Asians really helped to put us on the map, whether we wanted it or not, right? But it did, and it gives Singapore a new focus, right? There are still areas that we have to build up in that soft power, and I like to see one day Singapore in the top 10 of the food rankings for this best countries report, because I really feel that it's one of our best identities, is our food culture.
Thank you. I agree with you. I think the food culture, I guess it's a function of how we enable Singapore restaurants to sort of go out there and bring the food to the people of the world, as it were. I mean, if you look at countries that score very highly on food, you'll find that most people who've not been to the country have eaten the food, whether it's Indian or Chinese or Mexican, and I think yes. Right? Yeah. So we need to reach that state, I guess, and it's good. But it's interesting. You mentioned a few times about the Singapore brand, and I think people who are particularly in the world of marketing and nation branding fascinated and follow Singapore and the many things it does. Well, so my question to you is, how conscious is Singapore of this brand aspect? See, I mean, when you look at countries like India or China, etc., I think they look at it more from a geopolitical point of view, a diplomatic strategy point of view, and the brand is just a consequence of that. Singapore, like you said, we have passion made possible as a sort of a, I'm not sure if I should call it a tagline, but it seems to serve as one. So how conscious is certain actions that we take? Are we actually conscious of Singapore being a brand?
Yeah. I would say that consciousness has grown in more recent years. Right? I think in the past, and it's a very Singaporean mentality, it's very part of our psyche where we'll do the work and let our work show, right? What we stand for and who we are, right? But I think in today's world where so much calls for your attention all the time. You go on social media and all these things are being thrown in. Thanks to the marketing industry, a lot of targeted and personalized ads are coming at me, right? So I know in this world of I would say digital diplomacy, right? How do we make sure that Singapore as a brand stands out, right? We will do what we continue doing well, some of the things I talked about earlier, right? But in a new playing field, that consciousness about building Singapore as a brand has taken on a new level. And so that's why if you see the Singapore brand logo with the SG in the circle, that's actually a conscious effort to brand Singapore across all the different elements that we work at. rather than have individual parts of the economy or society doing their own thing. It's about coming together, joining forces, so that we really put Singapore on the map, and that red dot, right? There is a coherent narrative around it. So I would say we are working towards that, right? We are working across, at least from the public sector perspective, right? Trying to make sure there is coherence and that we really push this idea of passion made possible through the different things that we do.
Thank you. I mean, you sort of summarized the recipe for a successful nation brand. I'd say be conscious of the fact that it is developing a brand, whether one likes it or not, and that it's just a reality of the world we live in, where I would say we live in a hyper-branded world where everything from influencers to personal posts to everything become part of everybody's brand. And I think the second thing you mentioned on, which is balancing this sort of technology and agility with compassion and a society that also and an institutions that also focus on the softer aspects like culture and art and so on. And I think the last one where you spoke about, which is that balance of how you conduct yourself geopolitically and find reasons to have a seat at the table, especially when one does not have the sheer economic might that'll get you, or the weight of the population that'll get you a seat at the table. How do you use diplomacy as a tool, as well as how do you use some of the advanced sort of experiments, I would call it, or innovation that one is driving to get a seat at the table.
Exactly.
Just like to moving on to the end on a slightly lighter note, and because I know you are, because Singapore is not in the top 10 of great food, and you'd like to correct that. And
that really struck a hole in my heart, Harry. That will be my new goal, get us into the top 10.
So if somebody had to visit Singapore, and I'm pretty sure within the next 12 months, hopefully that'll be possible, it would be over the bump with enough people vaccines. What is the one food you would recommend? What is the one place you think people should eat?
Wow, that's a very loaded question, Harry, because I have to pick choices. Yeah. Maybe let me try and answer this in two ways. So one is where you should one go, right, to get a good flavor of what Singaporean food is. I would say go to any of the major hawker centers. A couple of things here. One is culturally, that is bread and butter to the Singapore food scene, right? And some of the best food and most affordable food really is found in our hawker centers, and you get the full experience of sitting in our humid weather and eating in in the open, right? So that's one, and you can get pretty much almost all our national dishes at the hawker center, right? The second thing is my own personal favorite dish is probably a bit less off the beaten track, but my own personal is what we call here a carrot cake, but it's actually the savory version rather than the sweet carrot cake with cream cheese frosting. The Singapore version is actually radish turnip that is shaved with and then made into a rice flour cake. Then it's fried with egg, and then depending on whether you want a variation with a sweet black sauce or not. That's my favorite thing. It's good for a snack. It's good for a meal.
It is tasty. In fact, I mean, though, because it's called a carrot cake and nobody explained to me the turnip part, the first 2 months I came to Singapore, I would visit many groceries looking for white carrots, and I'd never find them until a friend of mine explained to me that they were not carrots and they were actually radish.
They're radish, yes, exactly, yeah. And the only reason why it's called carrot is because of the translation from the Chinese dialect word. It's the same thing, carrot and radish. It's just the color is different.
Right. All right.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. And maybe one last recommendation on if some place where you personally go in order to have a relaxed time and chill out, because Singapore is quite a frantic pace of activity and everybody gets very busy, particularly since a lot of people in Singapore now are stuck here. What was your personal favorite and what would you recommend?
So again, I always try and sneak in two answers to every question. The first one is if, just to get away from the hustle and bustle, but to get some activity in as well, since we're all stuck at home a lot of the time nowadays. I do really enjoy the nature trails and the walks that the national parks in Singapore has really opened up, especially in the last 18 months. There's been a lot of work to just open up all these trails so that, residents can get out, right? So one of my favorites really is the Green Corridor or the Rail Corridor, where the former railway track connecting Singapore and Johor run through, and that's since been dismantled. It's in disuse, and they've converted the entire track into a walking trail. It's beautiful, it's forest, it's green. You don't really feel like you're in Singapore at all, and you don't hear any of the hustle bustle of the city. That's one. The other place I would go just to sit, for a couple of hours, have a coffee or have a meal, right, is Dempsey. So it's where a lot of the old black and white British colonial barracks where the soldiers used to stay, and that's been converted into a lifestyle F&B area. I really like it because the buildings are single story, very unlike the rest of Singapore. They are far apart, and it's set in green jungle. So it's really, really nice and peaceful as well.
Cool, thank you. Dempsey is also a personal favorite of mine. I've seen it more from when the only civilization there used to be the Civil Service Club and the Sami's Curry's restaurant in
Sami's
there.
Curry is really an institution. I really recommend that one too.
That's right. And today, where it's a bustling, I'd say, an international dining hotspot, as it were. Thank you so much, Don. This is wonderful, and I'm sure Singapore will go higher and higher as we consciously do many of the things as a society, a government, and as a brand together. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Harry. Pleasure.
Well, thank you all very much indeed. To celebrate this very special launch, we've created a very special app. It's a virtual reality experience where you can literally visit every single country that's featured in the 2021 study. Well, you can get it on your desktop, your laptop, your tablet, your mobile phone. All you need to do is just download it from the URL that's on the screen here. Enjoy, explore. It's full of interest and insights, and we'll be refreshing the content frequently over the course of the next few months. So please do go back frequently. Earlier, I talked about the significance of countries being seen as brands. This is being increasingly realised right across the world, not just by business leaders, but by governments at the most senior of levels. I caught up with the Prime Minister of the Netherlands and asked him how important he believes country brands are. Mr. Prime Minister, what contribution do you think that retailing makes to the economy and society in general?
So many. I mean, it is the biggest employer in the Netherlands. 900,000 people are somehow connected to the retail sector, so it is huge in its economic impact. That means that many people, in many cases young people, start their working life experiences in the retail sector. It is also a place where you can learn how to be more entrepreneurial and how to start your own business. It is a sector in our economy which is very much focused on innovation and disruptive innovation. It is very much connected to the modern economy, to the internet, to online shopping. So there are so many positives. And it's also a place where people come together. It's also a sort of community place. In some of the stores, people drink a cup of coffee, meet friends, and then buy some stuff. So it has many, many impacts on society.
Mr. Prime Minister, you had a fantastic career at Unilever. You obviously know brands very well. Do you think country brands are as important as product brands?
Oh, they're crucial. And what I found in this job is that the brand of Amsterdam, the brand of the Netherlands, the brand of Eindhoven, or the whole commercial area around cities like Zwolle and Amersfoort are crucial for our international standing. And the fact that you can bike to school as a child, that it's relatively safe here, that there are so many possibilities when you like sports or culture. And I really learned to brand that much more than we did already.
One last question, Mr. Prime Minister. What advice would you give retailers today who are under a lot of pressure, under a lot of stress? Everything's changing very fast.
Yeah, but still, at the same time, you are in a fascinating sector. So enjoy what you are doing. We live only once. This is the real thing. This is not the. So you have to make the best of it. And there are so many opportunities for good salespeople, for good businessmen and women, to make use of all those opportunities which are out there. And do realize that you play a very important part in societies. You are really part of society.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow, I can't believe it. We've come to the end of our broadcast. We're almost out of time. I'd like to thank everybody who participated in today's broadcast. And just to remind you again, please do download the app and enjoy going virtually into every single one of our countries in this year's 2021 Best Countries Study. So from me, David Roth, thank you very much indeed. And Mike, thank you very much indeed as well.
My pleasure. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.
Well, have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We really appreciate it.
you.